In our last session, we talked about biblical principles. Now we want to talk about listening. This is where we started our whole course, and now we're coming back to it again because it's so important, and I want to give you some additional insights into how to do this. Remember when I mentioned the Christian psychologist Paul Tournier, one of the very first who wrote from a Christian perspective? He said, "It is impossible to overestimate the immense need people have to be listened to be taken seriously, and to be fully understood." Let me say that again. It's impossible to overestimate the immense human need people have to be listened to be taken seriously, and to be fully understood. Listening is the first and most basic gift of pastoral counseling. It's the basic skill that comes first before any of our other skills. I want to read something that Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote in his book, Life Together. Bonhoeffer was a pastor and a teacher of pastors. He wrote, "The first service that one owes to others in the fellowship, in the church, consists in listening to them." Listening to them. Just as love to God begins with listening to His Word, so the beginning of love for the brethren is learning to listen to them. It is God's love for us that He not only gives us His Word, but also lends us His ear. So it's His work that we do for our brother when we learn to listen to him. Christians, especially ministers, so often think they must always contribute something when they are in the company of others, that this is the one service they have to render, to say things. They forget that listening can be a greater service than speaking. Did you hear that? Listening can be a greater service than speaking. He goes on, brotherly pastoral care is essentially distinguished from preaching by the fact that added to the task of speaking the word, there is the obligation of listening. In pastoral care, there's speaking and listening. There is a kind of listening with a half an ear that presumes already to know what the other person has to say. Have you ever done that? You listen and you think you know what they're going to say already? It's an impatient, inattentive listening that despises the brother and is only waiting for a chance to speak and thus get rid of the other person. Secular education today is aware that often a person can be helped merely by having someone listen to him seriously. And upon this insight, it has constructed its own soul therapy, which has attracted a lot of people, including Christians. But Christians have forgotten that the ministry of listening has been committed to them by Him who is Himself the great listener, and whose work they share. We should listen with the ears of God, that we may speak the word of God. One of the beautiful things about God is how He listens to us. Think how often we go to prayer assuming that God will listen to us, that we don't have to convince Him, that we don't have to hope He will give us His attention. God listens. What happens, do you think, when a pastor or a Christian friend really listens well? My counselor friend says, the person who is listening is in control. Really? The person who is listening is in control. He said, because listening earns trust. The better you listen, the more people trust you. And that gives you control of what's happening. Then you can speak to them. One of the assignments in my class is to tell students that they need to go visit with somebody. It's much like one I mentioned earlier. I want you to listen, ask them to tell you something that's important to them, Practice active listening, repeat it back, tell them the emotions that you pick up with it, and do not give them advice. Just listen. As long as they wish to talk about that thing, you listen. You give them your undivided attention. Don't try to think about what you're going to say. Every class, many students come back astonished at how much their friend appreciated being heard. People say, no one has ever listened to me like this before. People say, that really helped me. We didn't say anything. We just listened. Listening is an extraordinarily powerful thing we do. So we want to really be good at it. Pastors particularly represent God when we do this. Dave Hansen is a pastor in the United States who has written a book called The Art of Pastoring. It's a wonderful book. In one place he says, because of my position as pastor, the family I visit knows from the start that something about God is happening. That's what they assume when a pastor comes. Something about God is happening. I listen to them tell their story, trying to keep my own God-forsaken ego agenda out of the way. In parentheses, what he's thinking is, why don't you come to church more often? I want a bigger church, and you're part of my plan. So I try to keep that out of the way. After a while, I pray for the family. You wouldn't think that listening to people would be such a big deal. But listening is what God, to us, is what God does. And the fact that I listen to a family the way Jesus does makes a comparison happen inside them. A subconscious process in their minds tells them, Jesus listens to me. This is what Jesus is like. They have a sense, though they have talked to you as the pastor, that really, in a way, they've been talking to Jesus all the time. I want to share with you some things that I've learned from a book by John Cusick. His title is Read Me Like a Book. Read me like a book. First of all, he says, practice intentional listening. You cannot wait till your counseling sessions start. You need to practice this. Practice it at home. Practice it with a friend. You can say, look, I'm trying to learn a new skill. Can you help me? I'm going to just practice listening. Because this isn't natural to us. Many of us especially really can't wait to talk. Then, here's another thing we talked about earlier. Pay very careful attention to nonverbal and non-literal communication. Let me explain that. Pay attention to nonverbal and non-literal communication. When people come to counseling, or any time for that matter, much of their communication with you is nonverbal. Few people fully grasp the importance of nonverbal communication, despite the fact that it is common knowledge among communication researchers that approximately 60 to 65% of our meaning is expressed nonverbally. As you watch me teach, even if you're hearing this in another language, you're watching my face, you're watching my gestures, the way my body moves, you're taking meaning from me even if you can't understand my words. It's amazing. Well, that's true in counseling as well. But the trick is that nonverbal communication is much harder to read accurately than verbal communication. Verbal communication is precise, it's particular. Even then we have to listen carefully. But nonverbal communication is difficult. I think of a friend of mine years ago who, when I would speak, he would just stare at me. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if he was kind of phasing out or if he was really paying attention. It was nonverbal, and I couldn't quite tell what it meant. I learned later he just pays intense attention to everyone. Pastor Cusick writes, we listen for meaning with our eyes as well as our ears. So he gives an example. One man came to counseling with questions about time management. Okay, he came to see his pastor about time management. He talked about how much his work meant to him, the arrival of a new granddaughter, and his growing involvement in a new ministry at church. He said he loved and felt called to all these commitments. How much work meant to him, a new granddaughter, and new involvement in a ministry. After a few minutes, he breathed a great sigh. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes froze as if fixed on something invisible. I waited for a few seconds before asking, "What just happened there with your body and your eyes?" He thought it over and he replied, "I was feeling like a juggler who can't keep all the balls in the air. I was thinking, God, please take something away from me." That's what was going on when his face fell, his shoulders sagged. He was hoping that God would take something away so he wouldn't have to make the choice of how to handle these things. So, if that was your counselee, what do you think might happen next? Well, my first instinct would be quiet. See what else he figures out. Let's just sit and wait a while, because he's thinking about something he hadn't ever put into words before. So give him some more time to think. Then we might just talk about how these are all good things. And I don't want to make his decision for him. That wouldn't be good. I shouldn't be the one to say, well, maybe you should give up your ministry or spend less time with your granddaughter. That's not my role. I don't want to do that. I want him to think that through with the help of the Lord, and I want to be a good guide. So I can ask him questions like, tell me more about each of these things. What do they bring to your life? Why do you feel they're important? Do you feel that God has led to each of these? Of course, the birth of a granddaughter would certainly be that. But to just explore. Here's a little principle in counseling. I learned this years ago in a management class. The class was beware of the binary trap. Do you know what binary means? We have it everywhere. Everywhere I have computers, it's 0 and 1. The binary trap is thinking in any problem that there's either a 0 or a 1 solution and nothing else. So you might look at this and go, well, you either give something up or you have to be unhappy. And a counselor, with the help of God, can say, maybe there's other ways to think about this. Maybe we can find ways, with the help of God, to change how this feels or change how you respond.
We invite you to participate in the International Bible Teaching and Gospel Sharing Project. Whether these Christian expanded educational opportunities will become available to people around the world depends on all of us. We very much need and appreciate your prayer and financial support. For more information, please visit tvsseminary.com.
Another principle that Jason Cusick brings out is listen beneath the surface. Remember, I've told you this too. What is the issue beneath the issue? But he has a particularly interesting thing in mind here. He says when people face a crisis, their first attempts at answers come out of their embedded theology, out of the theological presuppositions that shape their lives and practices. He says their embedded theology, the things they really believe about God, may not be biblical. They may not be coherent. They might not be consistent. But it's the place from which God interprets, or from which people interpret their lives. They just have things they think about God. He says, another woman came to me for counseling after acting out in a fit of rage against her husband. Okay, can you picture? Fit of rage against her husband. During the discussion, she disclosed that she had been sexually abused as a child by an elderly neighbor. She saw a connection between her past abuse and her current feelings, but she felt very confused. She told me, I've forgiven my abuser like I should, so why am I still mad? Okay, listen to that. I've forgiven my abuser like I should, so why am I still mad? In her statement, I heard what sounded like some core beliefs. So I wrote them down. She said, I've forgiven my abuser. Okay, that's embedded theology. I have done what I needed to do to forgive. That's what she's thinking. She said, as I should. She said, so the embedded theology is I'm required to do this. Whether I'm ready to do it or not, I have to do this. And then she said, why am I still mad? Her embedded theology is, when I forgive, I'll feel better. You hear those things? Those are the things that she assumes to be true. This woman's question showed her core beliefs about forgiveness, healing, and recovery. She had never really thought about them before, but there they were. So as a pastor, we listen very carefully. I don't know if I would have caught those embedded things if I were her pastor. We listen very carefully and we try to think, what is it that they believe about life, about God, about the way things should be, and are those things exactly right in her situation? He also talks about two words that are helpful in counseling: patterns and coding. Patterns is when you listen to someone speak, and as they tell their story, you start to notice there are patterns in the way they tell stories. I don't mean the way they put a story together, I mean the way they perceive things. Perhaps here's someone who in all their stories, they're the hero. That's a pattern. They have to always be the hero. Maybe you're hearing that they always feel like a victim in their stories, that everything's always happening to them. Maybe the pattern is that they're uncertain. They're always uncertain. But you're listening for their kind of the backdrop to their story. What patterns do you hear as they tell different things about their life? What are you hearing? Coding goes to the idea that we don't always say things plainly. People use other words to kind of disguise what they're thinking, to make things sound better or worse. So they might say, I don't understand why everybody always lies to me. Well, that might be a code, because I can't believe that everybody always lies to them. It's a way they think. I know somebody who, whenever they talk, tends to laugh it off. But I don't think that's how they feel. Some people might always turn the attention to somebody else as though it's their fault or their issue, so that it's almost like they're in a bubble. You're listening for these patterns that they give you and the way they code their story to make things look a certain way. They change meanings a little bit. He also talks in this section, taking an idea from another writer, about thin and thick descriptions of people. Thin and thick. When we rush to stereotype someone, say, oh, you're just this way, that's a thin description. It might be right to a point, but it isn't a very full description. A thick description is something that really, after you have listened, you can describe them really to their satisfaction of what makes them work, how they are. Thick descriptions are formed when we take time to listen, to explore, to ask questions, and to avoid simplistic diagnoses. For example, he says, a thin description of a person with depression might lead a pastor to recommend these things as a remedy. They hear you're depressed, oh, I know what you should do. And the pastor might say, you need to think positive thoughts. Read passages of Scripture about joy of the Lord. You need to get outside more often. It's good to be outside. You need to get some exercise, because exercise is good for depression. Or maybe you need to get a place to serve people, because serving people helps depression. Well, any of those things could be true. There's some truth in all of them. But a thick description, where you really have listened, might lead a pastor to suggest some of those things, but the conscientious pastor would also help the person explore any unhealthy beliefs, was embedded theology, possible causes of depression. You still haven't recovered from the death of your mother, or your physical health isn't right, isn't good, and that's why you're depressed. You might discover that there are relational conflicts that are really depressing them, that there might be family patterns that explain why depression is so common for this person. That's a thick description. So these ideas from Jason Cusick are really helpful. He said, let me just recap. He said, practice intentional listening. Practice it. That was the point. Practice it. Pay attention to nonverbal and non-literal communication. I didn't mention non-literal. That's when people speak in metaphors. They say something that isn't out there, plain. They put it another way. They'll say, all life is just a circus, isn't it? You go, what does that mean to you? It's non-literal. Then he says, listen beneath the surface. And in that he talked about what is their embedded theology. And then he talked about patterns and coding, and about thick and thin descriptions of people. Patterns, what do we hear in the way they talk that starts to give us an idea of what makes them work? How do they tick? And coding is, what words do they use to hide other words? So those are some of the things that Jason Cusick tells us in his book, Read Me Like a Book.